How's it going, you guys? Welcome to Engineuity TV, where I'm going to teach you, or at least attempt to teach you, anything and everything car related or automotive related. So let's get started off with something pretty simple. Engines. So there are two main forms of engines. There's going to be the most common used one, which is going to be the four-stroke. It's essentially what you're going to find in basically every single car. And then you have the two-stroke, which is used in things like yard equipment like weed whackers, or some dirt bikes have it as well. So things of that nature. But like I said, the four-stroke is really the one that gets used the most. So this is probably the one, if anything, you're probably going to want to learn. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Right. Okay, so what we have is we have the four-stroke, and for both of these, they all have the exact same steps. There's four of them, and they can really be summed up in four pretty easy to remember words. We have suck, squeeze, bang, and below. Sorry for the terrible handwriting, but those are indeed the steps. So let's start off. Let's start off with the four-stroke, like I said, because that is indeed the engine that is most commonly used. It's the one that you're probably going to want to learn first, and it's also the easiest to understand. So let's go ahead and start off with drawing a few things here, shall we? So what we have is we have this piston, and actually I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come down here and do that. Okay, cool. Now we can draw this. So let's imagine that this piston is at the bottom of its cycle, starting with the suck cycle. Okay, so what happens is you have these magical things up here called valves. Now, the exhaust valve, which is this one over here on the right-hand side, that one is closed. And then your intake valve is this one over here, and that one is open. Now, it's probably exaggerated. I don't think it actually opens up that far, but it's just to show you. Now, what happens with that is air will actually come in here. It's actually a combination of air and fuel mixture, because somewhere up here you have something called an intake manifold, which is kind of like a pipe that comes up here. And somewhere around here you have something called a fuel injector. And that injects little bits of gasoline inside of your air, and that all comes in here, so you have boop, 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 boop. Everything's all in here, right? It's a gas-air mixture, right? So that's your suck. That's your suck step, right? So that's nice. And then what will happen here is we're just going to go ahead and erase all of that stuff. Boom, ba da 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 da. Cool, and we'll start drawing again. So the next one right up here is known as squeeze. Now what happens is that piston comes up in your cylinder, and it goes and it compresses everything. Now at this stage, both of your valves have closed. Right, that allows you to get your compression. And once again, like I said, intake manifold, so on and so forth. I haven't drawn those there just to make my drawing easier, because as you can see, my art skills are already terrible enough. So I said this is our squeeze step. What's happening is that all that space that the already pretty pressurized air and fuel mixture was in is now compressed even further. So it's under quite a bit of pressure. And then what happens is that this thing right up here, this rectangle, is called a spark plug. And the spark plug, the whole idea of it is exactly like its name. It sparks. And what happens when you get a source of ignition with fuel? Well, it does something called combusting, or it explodes, which is the whole bang cycle. Now, I said that explodes, boom, ba da 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 da, right? And that does this, which pushes. Wow, having problems with English here. I'm sorry, you guys. Pushes your piston right back down, right? So we're down here, and now we're left with smoke, or exhaust, as most of you guys know it. And once again, valves are all closed for the time being. Okay? Valves are all closed. Cool. So that is your bang. It pushes your piston back down. And keep in mind, at the end of your pistons, you also have these weird looking things right here called piston arms, is what I call them, and that's connected to something called a crankshaft, which is kind of an interesting little thingy right here that is connected to all of the other pistons inside of your engine. So as this is moving, it's moving this thing around, right? It's moving that around in circles, and it's making magic is essentially what it is. It's the whole driving force between an engine, just in general, not just a four-stroke, but just in general. So just keep in mind, keep that in your thoughts. Cool. So that's your exhaust, or that's your bang cycle. The next thing that we have is we have something called the exhaust cycle, which is where, and as I said, that's where this other valve comes in. It's called your exhaust valve. And you have something called an exhaust manifold as well, which is just a pipe right up here that leads off to your exhaust and stuff that underneath your car, leads into your muffler eventually. Your intake valve is closed at this time, and what happens is your piston comes right back up to right about here. There we go, close enough. Let's pretend that that's a perfect line, and it pushes all of the exhaust fumes on out of your car, and that's why you get your smoke. If you ever seen it on a cold morning and stuff like that, that's what the exhaust is doing. And then that, as I said, is your blow. And then it just loops right back up to here, and we go back through them all again. So pretty simple. Like I said, the four-stroke is really the easiest to understand. And going back to that whole piston arm idea, like I said, so right, and what's happening with that is, as I said, most four-cylinder engines have, or most four-stroke engines have multiple cylinders, and they're all connected to something called a camshaft, which have these little parts right here, which they're kind of interesting in the way that they work. They're little off-centered pieces of metal, little off-centered bars, if you will, that kind of, and as I said, I'll just draw a quick little two-cylinder camshaft, or not camshaft, crankshaft. Sorry if I used the wrong terminology there. Just draw a quick little two-cylinder crankshaft. So we have one piston connected. That would be connected, right to here and stuff like that, right? So, ooh, and it connects up here to a piston. And then, sorry, bad art skills. But connects to a piston up here. Meanwhile, this piston is also connected, but it's a little bit lower. So let's say, for example, that this one is on its compression cycle, and this one just finished. Let's see here. If it just did the squeeze, this one would just be doing, I believe it would be doing the suck, if I'm not mistaken. And whereas that's doing the squeeze, it's about to do the bang, which will push that right back down, which will then obviously rotate this around, which will push this one up and move it into the squeeze cycle. And as I said, that's kind of what keeps it all going. Hopefully that made sense to you guys. Now moving on to a two-stroke. Like I said, a two-stroke actually has all of the same steps. The only difference is that with a two-stroke, it's actually combining some of the steps into one, which is really interesting. And this is really kind of where it gets kind of weird to work with. So you have this part right here. This part, more specifically, is called an intake port. It's essentially just an intake port. It's very similar to your intake valve right over here. The only difference is that this one right here, and I'm actually going to redraw that because it's not actually up that high. It's actually more like right here. And same idea, you have your piston right here, and your piston in this one is going to come down to right about here, right? And let's go ahead and get started. So, excuse me, at this stage, at this stage of the cycle, and this is kind of, like I said, where it gets kind of complicated. At this stage of the cycle, this has just blown, which has pushed this piston down, down past the intake port, right? So that being said, there's exhaust fumes in here, but with those exhaust fumes, what happens is you have stuff coming in, but which pushes all of the exhaust fumes out, right? So in a perfect world, you would have all of your exhaust fumes out and a perfect air-fuel mixture right in here. That is your suck, and that is your blow at the same time. And technically, your bang went off as well. So that's three of your steps right there, all in one. And the bang kind of overlaps in both of the strokes. So that's where it kind of gets interesting. So, like I said, you have your air-fuel mixture right here, all in here, because it's all coming in through this little section right here. And it's also filling up all this stuff right down here as well. It's a very, very weird thing. And like I said, all of your exhaust is coming out here. Cool. Easy enough. let's go ahead and erase everything and show you guys what happens next. So same idea, your intake port's right here, but what happens next is that your piston actually comes up here and blocks off that exhaust port, which creates the squeeze or the compression. And as I said, you still have your fuel air mixture down here. It technically never really stops being inside of the engine, unlike in a 4-stroke. It's kind of always here. And as I said, this is empty now because all the exhaust fumes have already been pushed out. But now you have the fuel air mixture very, very tightly compressed up in here. That's that squeeze idea. And same idea, the bang goes off, which sends it right back down, which leads us back to the other step, and that's your second stroke. So that is essentially your 2-stroke engine. And like I said, where it kind of gets confusing is where this piston, like I said, the piston itself is actually blocking off and opening ports inside of the engine. So like I said, here when the piston's like down here, it's letting in all of the fuel air mixture and pushing the exhaust out, and then it goes up, shuts off the exhaust port, so it means that doesn't exist anymore. That's not here, and all of your fuel air mixture is all up. It's all squeezed up here. Like I said, erase this. Right, so your piston's up there compressing it all, and fuel air mixture is once again down here. Right, fuel air mixture right down there, and bang, and it pushes it down. Like I said, that's your 2-stroke. Hopefully that was relatively understandable. This is, of course, my first video. Hopefully I'll have my, hopefully everything will start to go a little bit smoother as I make more of these. But I hope that you enjoyed this one at least, and I hope that it at least taught you a little bit about the difference between a 2-stroke and a 4-stroke. Now this one specifically is talking about a fuel-injected 2-stroke and a fuel-injected 4-stroke. We'll cover carburetors versus fuel injection in a later video, but for now, that is the main idea behind it. Cool. Well, if you guys liked what you saw, if you guys feel like you've learned anything about it, feel free to like the video and subscribe and share it with your friends. It would definitely mean a lot to me. And until next time, you guys, have a great day.